Good evening. I call to order the special called Board of Commissioners meeting. First item on the agenda is new business. Discuss and/or take action on the Williamsport Estate subdivision located on Old Franklin Road. At this time, I'd like the record to show that I will recuse myself from discussion and/or vote due to a personal interest in the property.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this meeting this evening is to discuss and possibly initiate action on the Williamsport Estates subdivision. It has been reported to several members of this board that there are improprieties in the approvals and construction surrounding this subdivision. Commissioner Sutton was contacted by several citizens and made inquiries with the codes director and was told that there were no violations in this, and this was a subdivision that was in good standing. And I believe Commissioner Sutton at this time now has some things he would like to share with us.
Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Vice Mayor,
Yes,
before
sir.
they start this, may I make a statement for
Yes,
the
sir.
record? Thank you. Today, I was contacted at my office by Mr. Jack McCann, an attorney in Brentwood. He informed me that he was representing Mayor Toddy, and he requested that he first told me that he couldn't be here tonight. He requested that the meeting be rescheduled to another time. I told him that I could not schedule meetings, nor could I reschedule meetings, but that I would send his request to Mr. Hall, and Mr. Hall can correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, that I would send his request to Mr. Hall, who could forward it on to the commissioners who had requested the special meeting tonight, and for their action. And I made a recommendation that the meeting be rescheduled to a time that we agreed on that he could be here, which would have been Thursday night, this coming Thursday night, the 19th, to be held immediately after the dismissal of the regularly scheduled meeting. I forwarded that on to Mr. Hall, and with that recommendation, and there was some time lapse after that, I was advised by Mr. Hall that the board had not accepted the recommendation and that the meeting would proceed as scheduled, and I so informed Mr. McCann. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Mr. Sutton, you have the floor.
Thank you. This is in response to contact from citizens. Commissioner Purcell and I have made several inquiries into the approval and construction of Williamsport Estates. I first contacted Co-Director Lavorne a couple of months ago.
Yes, sir, somewhere in there.
In regard to some questions about the streets, roads, and the subdivision itself. The information I got back was everything was conformed and there was no problems involved. The owners and developers of the subdivision, I'll make this real brief, and if there's a mistake on it when you get a chance, please correct me, okay?
Okay, yes, sir.
The owners and developers of the subdivision are Walter and Beverly Toddy. Both have extensive experience in real estate and subdivision development. Mayor Toddy served on the Planning Commission since her election in 2010. Mayor Toddy and Mr. Lavorne attended every meeting of the Planning Commission during the period involved. In the June 14, 2011 meeting of the Planning Commission, the Toddys petitioned the Commission to rezone subject property. Mayor Toddy did not participate in the vote. The motion was passed. In July the 21st, 2011, meeting of the Board of Commissioners, we passed the first reading of the rezoning ordinance. Mayor Toddy did not participate in the vote. The vote was passed. In the August 18, 2011 meeting, the Board of Commissioners passed the second reading, and the property was rezoned from RS40 to RS20. Again, the mayor did not participate in the vote. The property was divided into 4 lots, and the subdivision plat was filed with the Williamson County Recorder of Deeds on December the 8th, 2011.
Commissioner Sutton, if I could make a amendment there. The record needs to show that the original was filed on October the 11th, and then an amended revised was filed on December the 8th.
Okay.
That was my error. I apologize.
Number 8, the plat was signed by Matt Beata as Second Secretary on behalf of the Planning Commission. Per Mr. Lavorne's email, he instructed Mr. Beata to sign the document, and in doing so told Mr. Beata the Planning Commission had taken the appropriate action. There exists no record of the Planning Commission receiving the plat for approval, reviewing the plat, or granting approval. Mr. Lauren's email confirms this did not occur. Those were not submitted to the planning commission. Myself, Commissioner Carroll, and interim city manager Wayne Hall were serving on the planning commission during the period and have no recollection of the subdivision being brought before the planning commission. Mr. Lauren's email established that the codes department determined this to be a major subdivision. Under subdivision regulations, section 2-102 outlines in detail the approval requirements for subdivisions under the major classifications. These regulations require at least 2 submissions of the planning commission resulting in approval prior to any building permit being issued. It also requires the posting of any appropriate bond or the completion of certain improvements prior to the building permits being issued. I could find no substantiation that this occurred either. This is where you may want to check with me later. The street is a private street named Williamsport Court, and according to EOC, the street has not been registered with them. I don't know if that's required or not by being a private street.
It was approved by them with the filing of the first plat. Their signature appears on the plat.
Okay, so it has been registered. Now, I told you there's a couple of them. The street, but then I'll skip that one. Unless approved by the planning commission, private streets under 4-108.2 shall conform to the provision of the section 4-106.2. Using the tables under 4-106.2, it appears the standards were not met in the construction of the road. Private drive, correct?
Yes, sir.
So they wouldn't conform to that. Wouldn't have to.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, 3 of the houses are now complete and appear to be inhabited. The 4th house faces Old Franklin Road and appears that access will be granted from Old Franklin Road, not Williamsport Road. Anybody else have anything else to say?
Mr. Vice Mayor? Yes, sir. During the research that was conducted by myself and Commissioner Sutton, there were several questions that obviously we could not answer. It just made more questions in our mind. It would be beneficial to us, I think, as a board, as we talk about this tonight, or before we talk about this tonight, if we could ask some questions of Mr. Lavorne and possibly Mr. Griggs, our city engineer. So if we could you ask Mr. Hall to have Mr. Lavorne go to the podium so that we can ask him some questions about this?
Mr. Hall?
I can start. Mr. Lavorne, how long have you been codes director?
6.5 years, well, almost 7 years.
Yes, sir. And have you received training in codes administration? Have you been to any classes?
I attend at least 8 hours of class a year. I'm required to do that by law.
Okay. The subdivision regulations that we're talking about here, if memory serves, didn't you either dramatically revise those or write those or something?
Those were adopted in 2007, and we have subdivisions that still are under old regulations and trying to implement new regulations. So sometimes things get crossed up in trying to implement the regulations on new things and still maintain the old things. The subdivision regulations, I would probably say that this would have been the first one that should have abided by those regulations.
Okay. Would you consider your working knowledge of the subdivision regulations strong?
Not as much in the new ones as the old ones, because we haven't repetitively used them.
Okay. But at any rate, would you consider your knowledge competent?
I would think so, yes.
Okay. Are the facts that Commissioner Sutton shared with us, except for the ones that were corrected during his presentation, are they essentially correct to the best of your knowledge?
Well, when he first inquired about the project, I told him yes, that everything was proper with it, but I did call him back and tell him that I could not find where everything had went through the planning commission, and told him that that was my mistake. but assured him that rezoning had taken the proper procedures and went through the proper procedures for the rezoning application.
Okay, but along those lines, approximately how long ago was that? I forget.
I don't really know. I can't remember exactly for sure. It was within the last month or so, 2 months.
2 months, something like that?
Something like that. I didn't write down the date.
Once you discovered that it had not been before the planning commission, have you done anything to try to correct the issue?
No, sir, I haven't.
Okay. Do you have an explanation as to how a complete subdivision could be built without ever having any planning commission approval?
I had honestly thought that we had followed the procedures as set forth in the regulations. We were in the midst of moving things around in our office, moving back over to City Hall from Public Works. Things get misplaced, things get out of order, and when I had asked that the plans be submitted for the Planning Commission to go before the Planning Commission, don't know if I misplaced a file, what happened to it, but at that point I had just assumed in my mind that everything was proper and asked that Sharon call for the secretary to sign off on the plat.
Was there a grading permit issued for that land out there?
No, sir, it wasn't.
There was no grading permit. There are 4 houses, as I understand it, on that property. That would mean that there have been 4 building permits issued?
Yes, sir.
Who issued those building permits?
Ms. Sharon Hall.
Okay. Does Ms. Hall, as part of her normal procedures, is she supposed to check to see that there is a plat on file and it's been approved?
She asked me if things are proper, and of course, like I said, I thought everything was proper, and have told everyone that has asked me that it's been proper. That's my mistake. I admit that as my mistake. I take full responsibility for it. I should have made sure that the plat had went to the Planning Commission. Should have made sure that everything was approved through the Planning Commission. That was my mistake. It wasn't intentional. But you know, tomorrow morning when I get into the office, I'm going to make sure that we put some internal controls in place, that we have checklists, that we go through the checklist before we proceed any further with any more signings of plats. That's,
Over the last 3 years, how many subdivisions would you say that we've had built?
I would have to go back and look through my files and see. I mean,
Would you
we
say
haven't.
it's less than 5, more than 5, less than 10, more than 10?
Well, I mean, we hadn't really had a lot built, but we've had a lot that's come back before the Planning Commission to have plats reapproved and things of that nature, because preliminary plats expire. They have to get reapproval to make sure that they can stay under the same subdivision regulations as they're under, and they're presented to the Planning Commission as such, and the Planning Commission makes the determination whether or not they want to go ahead and approve it under the old regulations or require them to go to the new regulations.
Can you give me an example of one of those that might have done that?
The Cows Creek subdivision is the most recent one.
Okay. So you remember that one, but you don't remember that Williamsport didn't go before?
Well, this was 2 years ago. I mean, this one was
Okay,
just
we'll come
last
back to,
month.
we'll come back to that. So we've got 4 building permits, and I guess 3 of the houses have sold. At least it looks that way to me, that 3 of the houses are occupied. I don't know whether they're rental property or sold property. They would have to have a separate certificate of occupancy, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Bledsoe issues those?
Yes,
Goes out and inspects them and issues those?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do the procedures require for him to check to make sure that everything with codes is correct before he issues that certificate of occupancy, or is it limited just to that
It's
structure?
just limited to that structure.
Okay. So who is responsible for checking to see that the construction the streets, roads, driveways, easements, all of that stuff that's required under, who is responsible for ensuring that all of that is complete in accordance with the plat?
That's my responsibility.
That's your
That's
responsibility.
what I
And you
said.
did conduct those on-site inspections?
Well, this being a private drive and not having to conform to a city standard street as I had determined that it wouldn't have to, it's just roughly grading out a driveway, and it's not considered a city street that wouldn't have to undergo an inspection.
Okay. When you found out through Commissioner Sutton's inquiry that there was a problem here, who else did you tell? Or did you tell anybody?
The only person that knew about it at the time was John, because I was sitting in John's office when I was talking to Commissioner Sutton.
But during this 2-month period between the time I contacted you or Commissioner Sutton contacted you and then I contacted you because I was doing the legwork for him on some of this stuff, I guess the price of being retired. Did you talk to anybody about it?
No, sir.
You didn't take any corrective action?
No, sir.
Okay, you didn't go to Mr. Smith, Chairman of the Planning Commission, and say, we've got to go back and fix this?
No, sir.
Okay. If we had not followed up with you, would you have taken any action?
Probably not, because I saw that as my mistake, and that there's really, I don't know what corrective measures we could have taken.
So because you couldn't readily call a corrective measure, you would have kept quiet about it?
Well, I can't say for sure if I would have or not. I mean, it's,
Well, the record shows that from October until I contacted you last week, you kept quiet about it.
for that point, yes, I have.
Yes. Going back to my question about potential subdivisions, how liable is the city here? How many potential situations do we have where you may have made this mistake? Do we have any accurate count? Have you begun a review? I heard you say tomorrow you would be instituting procedures, but have you done any personal review to see if this was done anyplace else on any other subdivision where your memory failed you or it got lost or there was some problem?
Yes, sir, I have looked at some old files of active subdivisions that's going on, but, under the same token, there's subdivisions that were created prior to me being here that were created that should not have been approved either. So this is just my mistake. Predecessors before me have made mistakes as well, and recorded plats that shouldn't have been recorded. As I said, I take full responsibility for this, and
Well, I appreciate the fact, Mr. Lavorne, that you take full responsibility after we called it to your attention. But I want us to be clear, from the time that Commissioner Sutton brought it up until I followed up with you, you took no action. And so you did not take responsibility for your actions until the board called it to your attention, and you really didn't have any other choice. Is that correct? Okay. I don't have any more questions, Mr. Vice Mayor, if anybody else does.
Mr. Lavorne, before you took this job that you currently hold, you were a city commissioner, correct?
yes, sir.
If you had to, I know it goes back several years, if you had to just try to remember, how many times did you run for office?
It's hard to say.
Okay,
4, 5.
okay. Irregardless, did you ever accept a campaign donation from the Toddies?
I can't remember.
You can't remember?
No, sir.
at any time in any of your campaigns, would Walt Toddy have been your campaign treasurer?
He possibly could have been, but I don't remember that either. I mean, that's several years ago.
Just for the record, in 2004, the Election Commission shows that Mr. Walt Toddy was the campaign treasurer of Don LeBorn.
Okay. That's what I said. It possibly could be, but I couldn't really remember, but yes, sir.
Do you understand what this looks like?
Like I said, it's a mistake that I've made, and
But do you understand what it looks like to the public, why you possibly made a mistake?
well, I can say this. Mr. Toddy has brought subdivision plats into me that I've told him that we will never take to the planning commission. Here
Did you tell him
recently,
that on this one?
I didn't tell him that on this one, because I
Because
thought
it didn't
this
go
one-
to the planning commission is what you're telling this board.
because I thought it had went to the planning commission, but when I reviewed it, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary that it didn't meet our codes. The subdivision that he wanted to put over on Cumberland Drive did not meet our code, and I told him that we would not bring that plat to the planning commission because it did not meet our code. And he said, okay, that's fine, I'll try to figure something else out and redraw it and present it some other time. So it's not that I'm showing favoritism to anybody. I try to enforce the codes equally across the board on everybody. This is a mistake on my part. And, I'm going to do everything I can do to make sure that this never happens again. It wasn't my intentions on this happening. I mean, that's all I can say is it's my fault. And
Mr. Basile asked you a question a moment ago. Do you I guess we'll let that go. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. LeVorn?
Only thing I would like is maybe just explain to us, like, one of the big concerns is, I didn't know what the subdivision looked like until the meeting, but the roads, I mean, you're saying because it had it wasn't a major subdivision, it didn't have to meet the city standards for the road?
well, it's not because it wasn't a major subdivision, it's because the two lots in the rear was located off an easement, not a city street, it was a private drive. And the subregs, as I had been told from our previous codes administrator, that two lots off of an easement was all that could locate off of an easement. Anything over that would require those roads to be built to city standards. So when I reviewed the plat, and talking to Mr. Toddy, that if he was going to do the easement, then it wouldn't have to be built to a city standard street because it was just two lots.
I'm just going to add one more thing. I'm not going to keep beating on you or anything like that, because anybody can make a mistake. I don't know anybody in this room hasn't made a mistake before. The only problem I've got is when I first asked you about it was a couple of months ago, and it came back, everything was apparently okay. There was some inaction done on it, and still could have been a mistake on it. How many times should have that gone through the planning commission?
If it followed the normal procedures, it should have went to the planning commission as a conceptual plat. Then it would have went to the planning commission as a preliminary, and then it would have went to the planning commission as a final plat.
So that's 3 times that we know
Yes,
of. Was there any demolition on that lot?
There was a house that he got a demolition permit for.
Did you get a permit for?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the only thing, like I said, I've got a problem, it's just not once, it's not a slight thing, it's repetitive on there, and I don't think it's fair to the Toddies or to the people here or anything else that we go that far I mean, this is a done deal. There's people living in those houses.
Yes, sir, I understand.
And that's what, there was just nothing done about it at the time, so that's all I have for you now.
Commissioner Carroll, do you have anything else?
No, I was just curious, I mean, Don had to do the home I mean, not Don, but John, right, did the home inspection. So somebody's been out there 4 times to this subdivision, at least, because there's 4 houses. One of them may not be done, I'm not sure. I guess you can't, answer, but, you know, I don't know how in today's time, and which I'm sure they're nice houses, I'm not saying that, but the angling of the houses and the lots, and I just don't know how something like this goes through, and doesn't go through the planning commission. At some point, I wondered why somebody didn't just go, wait a minute, you know, and go back and check, because, I mean, I feel like when I saw it, I was quite surprised that we let anything like this in the city of Fairview after, you know, I sat on the planning commission when we redid the codes, and it's just, I have a hard time believing that, if knowing the process and how many times somebody would have to go inspect the homes, that, you know, nothing was caught, no one realized, and I understand mistakes happen, but, you know, I don't know. And I just base it off of just recently driving to the subdivision. Just the placement of the houses, the gravel, you have, I don't know. I just am really disappointed that, I don't even know how it could happen, to tell you the truth. I'm done, yeah.
Excuse me. Mr. Vice Mayor, that's all the questions that I have for Mr. Lorne.
I've got 2 more real quick, if we could.
Sir?
Don, this should be more recent, so maybe you'll know this. If not, you can look it up. But when would you say the last CO was issued for someone to occupy the latest lot?
It was pretty recent, but I'd have to check with John. He would probably know best.
Do you think it has been issued since Commissioner Sutton made his first inquiry to you?
Probably so.
So you think you issued a CO when you knew it was in violation? You're saying it's possible you could have done that?
It's possible. But I don't issue the COs.
But you take
John-
full responsibility for John issuing the
but
COs,
he's-
right?
He's my employee, and I'm the
So if
director of the
they,
department. Yes,
if
sir.
they came in tomorrow and wanted their final inspection and was wanting their CO, would they be able to attain that tomorrow morning?
No, sir,
Why would you not give it to them now?
because this is certainly subdivision that should have been approved by the planning commission, and trying to rectify the issue, that would be something that I would step forward to do.
But you think it is possible that you issued one since this was brought to your attention?
It could be possible, yes, sir.
Would you think that that would be grave misconduct in your job title? If you knew something was specifically wrong, even if you didn't know it when Commissioner Sutton first asked you, and you realized that now you made a mistake, and then you compounded it by issuing something, or telling your employee to do it for you?
Well, I don't tell John to issue them. When he does the finals inspections and the builder calls for the CO, if the final inspection is approved, then he signs off on that CO. I don't have really any knowledge of when he does that.
All right. So now, some of the responsibility is shifted from you to John. And you're saying that you were in John's office, or John was in your office when Commissioner Sutton made this call. So at that point, John knew this subdivision was in violation at some point during this process. Are you now saying that John may have issued the CO on his own and he knew that this was in violation?
I'm not going to speculate on what he thinks. That's a question that would have to be asked to him.
Okay. And I will go ahead and ask the other question that Mr. Basile asked you. You say that you contacted no one. Are you going to tell this board tonight that you did not contact the mayor or her husband as the developer of this subdivision and tell them that there was a possibility that this could be brought out in public?
No,
You've
sir.
never one time,
No, sir.
and any of the time that since this subdivision has started and you knew about it or didn't know about it, did they ever question you as to why they didn't have to bring this one to the planning commission? Why you were letting this one slide? They never asked you that.
No, sir.
In your time working here, have they built in subdivisions in every year since you've been employed here? Or have they had lapses and go a year at a time without building or anything?
I don't know if they've built every year. When I first started, Braxton Bend was underway. That's, I guess, the only subdivision that was underway when I first was hired. And I don't think that they've really done anything else other than that one.
Okay. Would you say, and not speaking for them, but speaking for developers in general that have done business here for the last 20 years, would you say that a developer that does work here in this city would know that if they have a major subdivision, it would have to go to the planning commission for approval?
I can't speculate if they would know that or not. I mean,
Okay.
I can't speak for them.
Okay. That's all I have. Mr. Basile?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. That's all the questions I have. I think it might be helpful now if we talked with our city engineer, Mr. Griggs.
Okay.
Would you ask Mr. Griggs to join the podium or come to the podium for us?
Thank you, Mr. Griggs. Would you like to start?
If you want me to.
You go right ahead, sir.
Happy to. Mr. Griggs, thank you for coming tonight. You know it was inconvenience to call you out here, and we much appreciate it. I don't have a long list of questions, just kind of a general question to start. The City Manager Hall asked you to come out to provided you with a copy of the recorded plats that Mr. Lavorne had provided to him, asked you to visually inspect the property, and if you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through what you did and what your observations were, and then would you tell us where you think this subdivision, is in possible disagreement with our ordinances and regulations?
Sure. First of all, it's never an inconvenience for us to come speak with our client. We appreciate working for you. We first heard about this subdivision yesterday, in the middle of the day. Before that, we didn't know it existed. So Mr. Hall called me, asked me to look at this subdivision. I might be asked to give my opinion, so I said, well, I need to see it. So I went over yesterday afternoon, drove over there, drove down it, turned around, came back out. Today I spent looking through the subdivision regulations to see how it applied and whatnot. I saw the plat for the first time about a half an hour ago, tonight. And so we did not have a chance to review anything about the plat. There it is, it's been recorded. So what I did and what I plan to do now is what we normally do with your planning commission and every other planning commission we work for. We feel like it's our job to tell you what's in your regulations, how it compares to this design, and then it's up to the planning commission to say we're going to enforce every one of these exact laws, or we're going to give a little here and give a little there. Because we recognize, and we've told the planning commission this repeatedly, there's no set of subdivision regulations that are perfect, that can apply perfectly to every situation every time. It's just a good guide, and it's a good target. And we don't have the authority, and we're not going to take the authority to tell you what you can and can't do. We recognize your planning commission is composed of local people. They're going to take the subdivision regulations as a guide and modify them as they think best to serve the city of Fairview to the best of their ability. And what we talk about in our office is we're not just trying to protect the people that live there, we're trying to protect the people that are going to live there next. Because they got nobody to protect them. You know, they deserve to be able to buy one of those houses 20 years from now and know everything's good. So we don't just think we're working for the people here now, we think we're working with the people that are going to live there in the future. So, in light of that, all I can do is tell you how this compares to your regulations. And if the planning commission could have varied some of this, that's up to them. I can't speculate to that, but I can just tell you how it compares. It looks to me that the main point of contention is going to be the road. And so I kind of concentrated on that. And I'll read, rather than interpret, I'll just read out of your section 1-113.107. And I'll just read it verbatim. Where a permanent easement is used to provide access to a lot or tract of land having been or being separated by deed or plan from other properties, such easement shall be at least 50 feet in width. Where a permanent easement is proposed to provide access to more than one lot or tract of land, an access way may be constructed within the easement which will meet or exceed the standards for design and construction of public ways set forth in these regulations. I take that to mean you can have an easement to serve one lot. I saw the revised plat. It shows a 30-foot wide easement to serve lots 3 and 4. And when I went out there yesterday, lot number 1 fronts Old Franklin Road, but when they built the house, they built the driveway to the side. So really, there's 3 driveways going onto that side road. And the regulations say if there is an easement, it's got to be 50 feet wide. The plat shows it being 30 feet wide. But you can't have an easement serve more than one lot. And that easement is serving either 2 lots or 3 lots, however you look at it. I mean, the way it was built, it's serving 3. So either way, it's only supposed to serve 1. So if there's going to be a drive there, it's going to be a private drive, but your regulations say the private drive be constructed to the same standards as a public road. So from an engineering point of view, it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same width, thickness, strength, so forth. So I see that as one of the problems. The next is what would be the standards for a public road? And that's in table 4-1 in section 4-106.2. And there's some, a long list of tables, and it's based on the lot width. And as we read it, that road would need to be 20 feet wide, paved, 3 feet of grass on each side. That's to contrast to a gravel shoulder. It's allowed to be a grass shoulder, 3 feet wide on each side with a 50-foot right-of-way, and then paved with curb and gutter. And then there's other sections in the regulations that require 5-foot wide sidewalks on both sides and requires a 5-foot wide sidewalk on the portion that fronts Old Franklin Road. And there's other regulations that say there's got to be trees, and I think they got to be every 50 feet, and they got to be 2.5 inches in diameter. So those are the main deficiencies that we see compared to your regulations. That's not to say, that's not to guarantee that that's what the Planning Commission would have required, every one of those points. I can't speak to that, but that's what's in the regulations.
If I could ask you just a couple of follow-ups.
Sure.
Mr. Griggs, make sure my understanding is correct. Normal procedure is that as city engineer, you or Will would have looked at this and given a recommendation to the Planning Commission. Is that correct?
We point out how it differs from your regulations.
Okay.
If we're asked for a recommendation, we give one. But as I say, we recognize your Planning Commission are good people, experienced people. They can take it and say, this really doesn't apply in this situation. This does apply in this situation. And so we try to confine ourselves to just showing you how it differs from your regulations. Now, if we're asked for a recommendation, we'll give it.
Okay.
But we don't force it on you.
That was my word, not yours, so.
We don't force it on you.
All right. So you would have provided that difference?
Yes, sir.
Table of difference. The Planning Commission is within their authority to grant variances.
Yes, sir.
And I guess this is more for our city attorney than maybe it is for you, but while the Planning Commission can grant a variance, the codes director cannot grant a variance. That's my reading of the regulations. Is that correct, gentlemen? So In this particular instance, we don't know how the planning commission would have voted because in the 3 times that it went before, or, excuse me, didn't go before the planning commission, we don't know. That Mr. Lavorne granted the variances, so the planning commission didn't see them, and you, as the city engineering firm, did not see them either. Is that correct?
All I can say is we didn't see it. I don't know what the planning commission saw or didn't see.
If the planning commission had not granted the variance and this private drive was held to the standards of a public street, do you have an estimate as to how much monetary value was not spent
Yes, sir.
under the current conditions?
And we're lucky that you recently bid a road down here on Bowie Road, so we took those bid prices and measured off what we paid. And this is sort of worst case. This is all the sidewalks, all the trees, all, 20-foot, this is worst case.
Without any variances.
Without any variances, yes, sir. And your regulations say it's based on the cost estimate plus 25%. And the cost estimate plus 25% amounted to $106,000,
100 and how much?
106.
Okay. I have one last question, and then I'll cede the floor to whomever else would want to. You said you did not have any knowledge of this subdivision even existing until Mr. Hall contacted you yesterday.
Correct.
Okay. So I assume that meant Will didn't either.
That's what he told me today.
Okay. Is it normal or not normal that when y'all are involved in rendering this table for the planning commission, that you have some contact with the subdivisions engineer? That Will would have some contact with the subdivisions engineer or
Yes.
not?
It is common. What we found is most engineers want to work with the city commission because they want it to go through. What most engineers don't want to do is submit something and we find 1 or 2 issues and they got to resubmit and take it back because the planning commission only meets monthly or less. So it's common practice for us, and your regulations say you got to submit within 15 days before the planning commission meets. That gives us time to review it. If there's a question, for example, if there's a question about a culvert size, we can call the engineer and say, you're showing a 15-inch culvert. Our calculations show an 18-inch culvert. Let's work this out. What number are you using? What number are we using? And if they can prove to us that 15 is fine, we say, good, fine, our mistake. Or if we can prove to them that 18 inches is better, then they say, fine, good, our mistake. We're good at working with engineers because engineers generally want to get it right. And so that gives us a chance to work with them and try to cut down on the back and forth, and that's kind of standard practice.
So is it a fair assumption for this board that because of your statement that you did not have any knowledge and that Will told you he didn't have any knowledge, that process did not occur on this subdivision?
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have, Vice Mayor. Thank you.
Have a question? Anybody have a question for Mr. Griggs? Since you just saw the plat for the first time before the meeting, do you think there's more issues you could find if you had more time to study it and go out there, whether it be setbacks or how close houses are built together, or?
That went through my mind today. Without a accurate drawing of what's out there now, I don't know.
Okay,
I can't answer that question
okay.
because I don't know where the houses are now located or respective to their lines and so forth. So.
Let me make sure I got this correct from you. You said that there is a possibility for up to $106,000 that's been diverted?
If they were the bond would have been $106,000. The construction cost was $85,000. When you add the 25% to it required for the bond by the regulation, that gets the bond up to $106,000.
Okay.
But didn't you?
And that's to fully comply.
But and then if gutters had been added to that, there would have been an additional $19,000. Is that correct?
As I read the regulations, the gutters, on this one, there's a little bit of gray area. If If the planning commission had required gutters, curb and gutters, that would have been an additional 19,000.
Does the
I'm not
100
sure this is such a small, short road, I'm not sure that would have been required, to be honest with you. That's why I didn't include it in that first figure.
Does the 106,000 include a sidewalk on either side?
Yes, sir, it includes sidewalks on both sides and a sidewalk
then-
on along Old Franklin Road.
Okay.
But again, one of those sidewalks would be along the edge of the property, and I think the planning commission probably would have said, we don't need a sidewalk on that side. So that's why I want to emphasize, this is the big number,
Absolutely.
okay?
Mr. Lavorne, he just probably, you can be seated, Mr. Griggs. Mr. Lavorne, you can stay where you are. He brought up the point of a bond. Did the mayor and/or her husband get a bond for this subdivision?
No, sir.
They did not. Okay. You said they were issued a grading permit or was not?
I don't believe they were.
Did you require them to sign a development contract like every other developer for a subdivision?
Well, the only time we have a development agreement signed is when there's actually infrastructure. Like I said, I had determined that there wasn't a necessity for a road to be built in my assessment of the plat, so therefore, the development agreement wouldn't have been signed, because at that point, you wouldn't have required a bond either.
If I can, so what's the difference between him saying it should have been a road that should have been followed and you saying it's not? What's the difference?
Well, I had assessed it as just being a private drive and not having to conform to the city standards, but as he's brought out, that should have been, but
Okay.
So you're saying you made that decision on your own? You weren't even going to give the planning commission the chance to decide?
well, like I said, I thought the plats had went to the planning commission, so once the planning commission approves them, the planning commission don't see the development agreements. I prepare the development agreements and I get those signed, by the developers and by, the mayor. And at that time, all I can say is what I've been saying all along. It's a mistake that I've made, and
Are there any fees associated to the grading permits that should have been issued?
the way those grading permits are increments, it starts at $25 up to a maximum of $100, depending on how much soil you're moving.
So that would be, if we did not issue those, that would be more fees that the developers did not pay the city or the city did not collect.
Yes, sir.
I have a question, if I can. Well, you said that the mayor would sign. In this case, she wouldn't have signed when you were just talking about the plats. You just said you would,
No, the development
the
agreement.
development, okay, but you said the mayor would sign it. But if she had a personal interest, you wouldn't have her sign it.
No,
Who would you have sign it?
it'd have to be the vice mayor.
Okay.
Did she sign the plats?
Yes, sir. His owner.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. Isn't there a fee when you bring something before the planning commission?
Yes, sir.
Was that fee paid by them?
I would have to go back and look. I'm sure that I've received some fee from them for review of the plats, but I have to go back through my files and look to see if it had been.
Now, this is a very important question. Is it the fee for you reviewing the plats, or is it a fee for you reviewing the plats and sending it to the planning commission, or is it a fee for going to the planning commission?
Well, this is just a fee in general that is charged for all plats, even plats that are two-lot subdivisions that can be approved administratively. Those fees are assessed on all plats.
Are they assessed every time the plat changes, or just with the original?
Yes, sir, they would have to submit fees for revisions, but if the revision didn't change anything on the plat, other than, not adding any lots or anything like that, it would remain the same.
But in this case, there had to be a revision filed, so there had to be 2 fees paid.
Yes, sir.
The Toddy's would have had to pay 2 fees.
Yes, sir.
So, you made a mistake, according to your testimony, you made a mistake one time and forgot. Then 2 months later, we had to do this again. You forgot again?
Well, the revision that was on this plat wouldn't have had to went through the planning commission because it was just changing the easement size from a 20-foot to a 30-foot easement.
If the easements are incorrect, should it have gone to the planning commission?
What do you mean, if that was incorrect?
Well, Mr. Griggs stated that the easement needs to be a 50-foot easement, but what you had recorded on the plat was a 30-foot easement. So wouldn't you have to take that before the planning commission to let them decide if they're going to grant a variance for a 30-foot easement as opposed to a 50-foot easement required by the code?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't really know why I didn't have the plats taken to the planning commission.
That wasn't the question.
I know, but I'm saying, I don't know why I didn't take the plats to the planning commission. All I know that it's a mistake on my part, and, that's 2 years ago, and I can't remember everything that went on since 2 years ago.
Mayor, I think it would be helpful, though we cannot compel him to do so. I think it would be helpful if we could talk to Mr. Toddy. I see him in the audience here. We could request that he come to the podium. He could shed some light on some of these questions.
Mr. Toddy, if you're willing to come up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Toddy. Just a couple of background questions, and then we'll get to a couple of questions that are at the heart of the issue. You've been doing this a long time, right?
Pretty much.
And this was not your first subdivision, for sure?
That's correct.
I know that there's plenty of those around town. Would you say that you're generally familiar with the approval process and what goes on and how you get a subdivision approved?
I'd say generally. I don't know all the specifics about everything. Some things seem to change, and I don't really probably follow up as close as I should to know what the changes are.
Do you have an explanation as to how this occurred? You built 4 houses out there, put a street in, did some other stuff. You've done this before. Didn't it strike you odd that you didn't ever have to go before the planning commission? Has you ever built a subdivision before without ever going before the planning commission?
No, we have always went before a planning commission, and we was usually doing bigger stuff. This being on an easement, it was really my understanding that that it was doable. I, like I say, didn't know the exact particulars about it. Like it was my understanding it could be done on a gravel easement if the easement was a substantial size.
But it just didn't strike you odd that you didn't have to go before the planning commission?
Well, it probably crossed my mind later on, but being busy, it's a passing thought, and I roll on, and I may not have the time like others to dwell on every little thing.
When you started building and so forth and so on and got your certificates, who gave you back your copy? Did Mr. Lavorne present it to you or give it to your engineer, or do you even remember?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Do you remember having, during the construction phase of any of these houses, do you ever remember having a conversation with Mr. Lavorne about the houses and asking if he had any concerns or anything, or did you just rock and roll?
Just normal, build the house and pull the permits, build the house, get the inspections and roll on. I didn't know there was a problem.
Okay, all right. I don't have any more questions. Thank you for answering my questions. I don't
Anybody
any
have
more
another
questions.
question for Mr. Toddy?
I don't.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I don't have any more questions for Mr. Lavorne. But I guess I would summarize where I sit at this particular point. I think this is pretty severe mistake, and I'm not sure what the appropriate action is for taking, trying to fix it, but I do think the city has to begin action to try to fix it. I think that some of what I heard provided some insight tonight as to how it could occur. Some of what I heard was very disturbing. Lack of controls in the codes office, multiple opportunities that this mistake could have been caught. Most damaging to what I heard tonight was the fact that once our codes director was notified by Commissioner Sutton, he took no action at all, even when he knew, responded back to Commissioner Sutton at some point in time that he knew there was a mistake made. Didn't notify anybody, according to the testimony of Mr. Toddy. He wasn't notified. No one that was involved that could have assisted him in determining how to correct the mistake was contacted. That, to me, is not acceptable, and quite frankly, I believe that the most truthful thing that was said this evening was that he wouldn't have told a soul if it hadn't been called to his attention. In respect to how I think about the relationship between the mayor and Mr. Toddy and Mr. Lavorne, I think there are several things here that could possibly need a little more conversation. That part of it, I do not believe was on the agenda tonight. I don't believe it would be appropriate to have any discussion about that tonight. What I would like to do is make a motion that we have a second hearing, that the mayor, if she so wishes, can bring her attorney. We can find a mutually acceptable date between the board. I understand Thursday night, we might consider having it Thursday night after the regular meeting. And that we can discuss with her and Mr. Toddy at that time in more detail just what they knew and didn't know. As I said, it was not part of the agenda tonight, and I know the mayor was just coming back off of a trip, and so I don't really think it's within our area to be going down that road tonight. But
I'll second that motion.
I think I'd like to set a motion for a second hearing where we can discuss with the mayor what her level of involvement was and put that to rest one way or the other. So I move for Thursday night following our regular meeting.
Second.
And we have a second. Any further discussion?
I do have, I don't know if it's discussion on this, on the motion or not, but I don't know what direction we need to give the planning commission. Chairperson is here tonight, Mr. Smith. We need to address these issues as soon as possible with the possibility of corrections being made through the engineer suggestion to them, and we need to address them as soon as possible. In all fairness to everybody involved, the Toddies, the homeowners, the other builders and contractors inside the city. Mr. Hall, can you direct that? Thank you. Sure.
You want us to have comments about Thursday night or?
No, that is just so that we can fix the problem. That's not how it happened, it's just how to fix it.
You're not requiring him to have that for Thursday night,
No,
though, is what he's
no.
saying.
I'm not, I just think it should be the mayor and Mr. Toddy if he chooses
That's
to
fine. I'm just-
participate. Yeah,
this is
Mr. Griggs doesn't need
a
to come back
sidebar.
for Thursday night.
Till we solve the problem.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All were in favor, okay? One last thing, I guess, before we turn the meeting back over to the mayor. Larry, do you, in anything that you've heard this evening and the possibility of over $100,000 being averted by a board member, at what point under our charter and our oath of office do we have to turn this over to the state comptroller's office and/or any other thing that we have to report as we're obligated?
Well, you have to see, the amount is not the thing that would determine whether you do it or not. The statute says that when it becomes obvious or should know if something has been done that's illegal. Now, if it's a mistake's not illegal. So you would not be required to turn that over to the
Okay.
comptroller because, what the purpose of the comptroller is to see that public officials are not, and any public official, whether they're a board member or whether they work for the public as an employee, is not doing something that borders on getting funds illegally. Now, if a mistake was made, you correct mistakes. Mistakes are not covered under the statute that talks about reporting to the comptroller.
Okay? With that being said, if what Mr. Lavorne said had happened and nobody had ever known about this, at what point would we have reported it? If we never decided to have this and people knew about it and nobody wanted to do anything about it, would we turn it over at that time?
Well, yeah, if the board knew about it and didn't take any action to correct it, what you get into then is some sort, you could possibly get into some sort of thing of a cover-up. And those would have to be reported. And then, once you report them, it's up to the comptroller as to whether they investigate it or don't investigate it. That's not your decision. Once that does it. But, you can't start to correct something until you know about it.
Right.
And that's the reason that statutes don't run until you know about it. Statute limitations don't run against the city correcting mistakes and this kind of stuff. But as far as having to report to the comptroller, very obviously, I haven't heard anything that sounds of a conspiracy nature to get out of something. That type of thing you'd have to report.
Absolutely, okay?
As soon as you knew about it. But again, for the record, so that everybody hears me, I have not heard anything that speaks of that or anything that sounds in that nature.
Okay.
But just to clarify what you just said, it is a responsibility to this board to take the action we've taken so far.
That's a responsibility. Once you know that something is amiss like this, whether it's a mistake or not, whether it's brought before the board, if it's brought before the appropriate subboard, if it was brought before the planning commission, so that they could say, yes, we want to recommend this, and it goes up for a recommendation. Doesn't necessarily have to be this board, it could be any.
But we all follow.
You have a responsibility to correct things that are wrong, yes.
Thank you.
But you don't have a responsibility to report mistakes to the comptroller unless it's a mistake in your budget or a mistake in your accounts or something that you can't account for.
Who officially decides whether it was a mistake or not?
Well, I mean, that's gonna be up to the board to say, if you look and something's a mistake. I mean, everybody has an idea of what is a mistake and what's an intention. And if the board instructs, see, you're not doing any harm if the board instructs that the comptroller be notified, then you notify the comptroller, and then it's up to them to do whatever they look at it. The comptroller makes a decision of, am I going to investigate? Am I not going to investigate? If they investigate, then they make a report. They refer it to wherever they want to.
Okay. Any further questions?
At the meeting.
it is set for
Well,
Thursday
one other
night.
thing, just for clarification, it has nothing to do with what we're talking here about, but there is, you know, if the planning commission is looking at a drawing, as Mr. Griggs said, and they approve something that's not in accordance with our standards, then they have granted a variance, and that's the only time they can grant a variance. If it comes out later that there's something that someone needs a variance on or desires a variance on, then they file a petition to be heard by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Yes, sir. I yield the floor back to the mayor.
Thank you. I need a motion for adjournment, please.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Good evening.